think we can start.
Are we live?
Mhm.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Pablo Gomez, and I am faculty in the Departments of Medical History and Bioethics and the Department of History here at the University of Wisconsin. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual seminar on the future of food justice. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the University of Wisconsin, where these seminars is being virtually hosted, is located on the homelands of the Ho-Chunk people whose ancestors lived in the region where the university is located for at least 12,000 years, but were forcibly removed by our state and federal governments following the Treaty of 1832. This webinar is the final event on the Interrogating the Plantationocene Sawyer Seminar. This was a 2-year project that aimed to come to terms with the plantation as a transformational moment in human and natural history on a global scale. In thinking with the Plantationocene, we have been examining the structures of power embedded in imperial and capitalist formulation, the erasure of certain forms of life and relationships, and the enduring layers of history and the legacies of plantation capitalism that persists, manifested in acts of racialized violence, growing land alienation, and accelerated species loss. At the same time, the project has also aimed to make visible past and present refugia of resistance where different ways of being sustained by different economies and forms of knowledge have flourished. Briefly, during the past 2 years, we have had events focusing on the following themes: the Anthropocene, the Capitalocene, the Plantationocene, land, labor embodies, value, economy, and sensoria. And this, our final event, was supposed to happen in person in April of this year. But as it has been the case with so many other conferences and meetings, we have had to postpone it and move it to this online version. I want to say that all the events in the seminar have been made possible by generous funding from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and its John E. Sawyer Seminar Program, and by support from the Center for Humanities, the Holt Center for Science and Technology Studies, and the Nelson Institute, the Center for History and Environment at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I want to thank Jackie Theo from the Department of English, who has been indispensable in helping us with the logistics of previous in-person events and put together all the technical aspects of today's webinar together with Sophie Sapp Moore, who is one of the co-organizers of the Sawyer Seminar. I've been working on this project with Sophie and my colleagues, Greg Milman from the Departments of Medical History and Bioethics and the Department of History, and with Monique Alleward from the Department of English. Many other people in different departments and institutes have been crucial for the success of the seminar, and we're very grateful for all your help. I want to thank in particular those of you who have joined us in the events and seminars since we started the projects. We are the beneficiaries of your collective insights and generous participation. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge Sophie, who is finishing her postdoc with us this semester, who has been the crucial person and intellectual engine behind all the events in the seminar. And I think I speak for Monique and Greg and for everybody else when I say that we couldn't have asked for a better partner for this project. We're all very grateful and have learned very much from you, Sophie. Okay, to the task at hand today. So our schedule for today is as follows. So I'm gonna make short introductions for the panelists that have gonna be participating with pre-recorded videos. And this is because of time zone differences. So we have 3 videos and each one is about 11 minutes long. After that, we will have commentaries about the contributions from 3 distinguished discussants today, and that will go for about 20 minutes. And at around 1 p.m., we will have a facilitated Q&A, and we will be finished this event at 1:30 p.m. I want to ask everybody to please use the Q&A function on Zoom, and you might start posting questions anytime you want during the event. Okay. And I will first introduce our panelists with pre-recorded talks in the order in which they will go. So the first panelist is Malik Yakini, who is co-founder and executive director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. This project operates a 7-acre urban farm and is spearheading the opening of the Detroit's People Food Co-op, a co-op grocery store in Detroit's North End. Yakini views the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network as part of the larger movement for building power, self-determination, and justice. He's adamantly opposed to the system of white supremacy, capitalism, and patriarchy. He has intense interest in contributing to the development of an international food sovereignty movement that embraces Black communities in the Americas, the Caribbean, and Africa. He serves on the leadership team of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance. Our second speaker is Ashlesha Khadse, who has been working on farmers and food movements since 2009. She is currently the regional director, Asia and the Pacific for Thousand Currents, a grassroots organization that supports indigenous women and youth leaders in the Global South. As part of the Amrita Bhumi Agroecology School, which is a peasant agroecology training school in southern India run by the Karnataka State Farmers Movement and part of La Via Campesina, she helps coordinate trainings for rural youth. Ashlesha completed her MS at El Colegio de la Frontera Sur in Chiapas, Mexico in 2016, where she conducted research on the zero-budget natural farming movement. Her main areas of interest are agroecology movements, gender, agriculture, and grassroots solutions to the agrarian and climate crisis. Christine Kiev is a PhD student in geography at the University of Kentucky, having recently completed their master's in geography at the University of Wisconsin. The work has focused on the messy intersections of political ecology, Black geographies, and more than humanisms in sites of agrobiodiversity conservation, seed keeping, and plant collecting. They are currently drawn to the living and lively archives of food systems and the political ecological possibilities of local seed networks. And Case Whitley is a graduate student in the Agroecology Master's program at UW-Madison. Before coming back to school, Case traveled around the country working on small farms and believes that they will be the core of any food sovereign future. Case is deeply interested in the phenomenon of institutional and university agroecology and what their roles might be in supporting bottom-up movements. And now we'll see the videos. We're going to stop for a second. Jackie, we are not, we don't have audio here.
Oh, I guess, sorry. Let me try that again.
Good, thanks.
Greetings. My name is Malik Yakini. I'm Executive Director of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. It's impossible for me to respond to all 10 questions in 10 minutes, so I'm going to take select questions and respond to those. But the first question being, what does food justice mean to you, and how does it figure into our work? So first, I'll say that I often use the term relative justice because I'm not sure that it's possible to create real justice in a situation where we're operating on land that was essentially stolen from the indigenous population and where much of the wealth of the United States was created by the labor of enslaved Africans. And so without almost a total redistribution of the land mass in the United States and the payment of huge amounts of reparations to the descendants of formerly enslaved Africans, I'm not sure that real justice can be achieved. So I often use the term relative justice. Some of the characteristics of what a more just food system might look like would include upholding food as a human right, the access to food as a human right, regardless of your economic standing. And that food will be nutrient-dense, culturally appropriate food. Secondly, workers in the food system must be treated justly, and that includes having safe working and living conditions, being paid livable wages, and being treated with the respect that should be afforded a human being. Thirdly, we need reciprocal relationships with communities. We need to stop these extractive economies, which are sucking the food dollars out of communities like Detroit and making already wealthy people even more wealthy. We need community and cooperative ownership of the infrastructure of the food system, including vehicles, processing facilities, and retail stores that the community owns and benefits from. And finally, a more just food system would be earth-friendly, would not use toxic chemicals that are introduced into the environment. It would conserve the usage of water and would minimize the distances which food is transported, and finally would use regenerative agricultural practices. While Detroit Black Community Food Security Network has done some policy work on both the state and the city level, the vast majority of our work has been building models of community self-determination that are an essential element in creating food justice. So we don't believe that we should just try to convince, pressure, or compel elected and appointed political officials to create a more just food system, but we should actually begin building the models of what a more just food system might look like. And that has been the primary work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network. In terms of our political commitments, the core values that drives the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network are love, and we are committed to, we have a love and are committed to Black people in particular and humanity in general. We love Detroit as well and are committed to Detroit. African self-determination is our second core value. We believe in and work to promote self-reliance, collective work, cooperative economics, and self-governance among African people. Integrity. We're working on behalf of our communities and our organizational practices. We therefore strive to create transparency and a culture of critique. Justice is our fourth core value. We believe in and work to promote racial equity, class consciousness, and gender equity. Our next value is respect for life and nature. We honor and respect spirit, life, and nature. We have the responsibility of good stewardship of the land and water. And finally, our last core value is sustainability. We value and are developing an organizational culture of learning, growth, and youth development. So we're not just interested in sustainable agricultural practices, but our practices within our organization and within our organizing also have to be sustainable so that we involve young people and the movement has longevity. That our culture within the organization is future focused, but also informed by history. We advocate for human systems that are just, regenerative, and earth friendly. In terms of the changes that I've seen in the course of my work within the food movement, in the US in particular, there's been a much sharper analysis of the role of race and gender within the movement. Black, Indigenous, and people of color have pressed for changes in the use of language, in the styles of leadership, and how we engage communities and in funding. And in my estimation, that rising pushback against white supremacy has been charged by the kind of general recognition within the society of how white supremacy, racism is embedded in the very fabric of American society. What interventions would you consider most successful in your food justice work, and what have been the greatest challenges? Our greatest interventions have been the creation of the City of Detroit's food security policy, which we stewarded into existence along with other activists in Detroit, and also the creation of the Detroit Food Policy Council. Also, D-Town Farm, the 7-acre farm that we operate in a city-owned park, which grows more than 36 different fruits, vegetables, and herbs each year, has been a very successful intervention. And the project that we're currently working on bringing to fruition, the Detroit People's Food Co-op, even in the organizing of it, has been a tremendous success We currently have 1,090 member owners of the Detroit People's Food Co-op, and we're expecting it to open sometime in 2022. We've had many challenges, but among our greatest challenges have been our own internal contradictions. The baggage that we bring to our organizational life because of issues that we have not deeply interrogated and resolved in our own lives. Also, funding is an ongoing challenge. Land ownership has been a challenge. We would very much like to buy the land that we're farming on, and that's the same with many farmers in the city of Detroit. Then also, we've had a tremendous problem with theft at D-Town Farm. We've had more than 5 break-ins where we've lost thousands of dollars of equipment. What do you see as the future of food justice in 20 years? The demographics of the United States will change significantly over the next 20 years, with people who are defined as white expected to be the numerical minority by 2041. I'm expecting in the next 20 years, we'll see a continued demand for a shift in power, a shift in access and ownership of land, and a shift in access to capital. We'll see more sharp battles between those who are trying to hold on to an antiquated system and those who are trying to create a new, more just society and a more just food system. We will, of course, see the increasing impact of climate change. We'll see the increasing adaptation of growing methods and crops from indigenous cultures in response to that climate change. We'll see an increasing use of innovation in response to climate change, including soilless growing systems, the use of biochar and indoor growing. But we'll also see an increase in the use of GMOs on the part of the corporate food structure as they respond to climate change. How do we understand the relationship of plantations to food justice and security? Plantations in the era of chattel slavery produced tremendous yields, which resulted in tremendous profits for the Western world. The same is true today with plantations. In both cases, the rights of the human beings who provide the engine that generate the profits for the plantations are subordinated to that profit. All of that is in addition to the fact that plantations cause tremendous environmental degradation because of the monocropping, because of the use of heavy machinery, and because of the use of tremendous amounts of water. What infrastructures, knowledges, and political or social commitments are necessary in advancing the cause of food justice? One, we need an understanding of the intersectionality of oppressive systems. Food justice can't be addressed in isolation. We need to develop a more broad commitment to land redistribution. We need more agreement around the goals of the food justice movement. We need a shift in consumer awareness so that consumers understand that every time they make a food purchase, they're making a political decision. And we need a shift in funding at every level of the food system, shifting money away from the corporate industrial food system to more localized, community controlled, and community benefiting systems. In terms of the relationship between academic researchers and community researchers, there's always a power differential that exists between universities and communities. And so we need to be aware of that power differential. Academics often gain some personal benefit from the research, whereas community members typically don't. The community members are typically just in this to address problems in their own community. I found that the best partnerships are driven by community-generated research questions, that there's equitable so-called ownership of the research, and that the research is collaborative and transfers skills, knowledge, and resources to the community. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel.
Hi, my name is Ashlesha. I'm based in South India. I've been volunteering with farmers' organizations and farmers' movements in India since about 2009. I've continued to play a volunteer role supporting many different farmers' campaigns in the country. So my current role has to do with agroecology, specifically with a farmers' agroecology school in southern India called Amrita Bhumi. And Amrita Bhumi was created by a South Indian farmer organization called KRRS, or Karnataka State Farmers Association, which is one of the key members of Via Campesina in this region. So Amrita Bhumi is a 5-year-old agroecology school. It's a space where we carry out many different kinds of pedagogical processes, such as practical trainings on agroecology, but also political education and political formation, where we talk about structural issues, historical processes, and also current policies and how they affect our food system and the peasantry. We undertake many different programs, such as trainings, value addition, marketing. But two programs that are quite notable that I would like to highlight here are: the first program is on women's collective farming. So across the country, women undertake the majority of the farm work, yet they don't own any farmland. So given this problem, there's a national level process really which has been led by many different women's organizations, and it's about how to bring women together and how to collectivize farming and how to improve their access to land. So Amrita Bhumi is trying to initiate this process in the state of Karnataka, and at the moment we have a program where women from historically landless castes, particularly Dalit, also some indigenous women who have joined hands together and are now farming collectively, and Amrita Bhumi is facilitating this process. So it's an experimental effort. Another notable program that I'd like to highlight is one on youth internships. So this is a rare program in a country like India and even globally, because young people are leaving agriculture. Not just young people, but the rate of farmers leaving agriculture is quite high. They're moving to urban areas because of the unviability of agriculture in today's day and age, and that is a result of the policy environment which tends to devalorize agriculture and which aims to push people out of farming and into the industrial sector. So as a result of this, we have so many young people in our country who don't know how to farm. They may come from rural farming families. They don't know how to practice agroecology. So this is a program for them, and they can come to Amrita Bhumi. They can do long-term internships, 1 year, 2 year, as long as they want, and they can work on campus and they can help in the day-to-day functioning of the school. And hopefully by the end of the year, they have a movement framework so that they're able to take and undertake movement building in their own villages where they come from. And I also want to say that Amrita Bhumi and KRRS are part of the national agroecology movement. The Karnataka Farmers Movement is one of the first farmer movements that valued agroecology and that pushed agroecology as a political process inside its own organization. So we have many farmers movements in the country, but rarely have they promoted agroecology, not just as rhetorically, but practically. So KRRS, I would say, is probably the first farmers organization to push agroecology. In fact, they were the pioneers of an agroecology movement in South India, which is called natural farming or zero budget natural farming. And this movement spread organically through a decentralized process via farmer to farmer movement processes, and it was self-organized in different localities, by local groups, and the farmers movement was able to mobilize many different allies who joined this agroecology movement. So I'm talking about the agroecology school here, and also keeping in mind that the agroecology school is linked to the larger farmers movement in India and internationally, part of Via Campesina. First of all, the school in itself serves as a movement building space, a place where young people can come, they can learn about the food justice movement, and also there's a lot of cross-pollination between movements. So we have people not just from the farmers movement, but also many other movements who might not be directly working on issues of food justice. So for example, in India we have a Dalit movement, and they routinely use our center, our agroecology school, for training their own young cadre. So when they come to the campus, there are conversations, there's cross-movement pollination around food justice issues. Many of our young graduates, they work with national farmers campaigns, whether those are campaigns against GMOs, international seed companies privatizing our seed, or against free trade agreements, and for seed rights, human health rights, fair prices to farmers, etc. So all of these issues have to do with food justice. So this is one of the key ways in which food justice shows up in our work. Secondly, the agroecology school is a place where we learn to valorize peasant and indigenous knowledge. We understand that peasant knowledge, indigenous knowledge, is the basis of agroecology, which is something that is very different from what has historically been pushed by public policy in our country, is this kind of knowledge which comes from labs, right? Modern technologies, green revolution technologies, which have tended to marginalize peasant knowledge, and the impact of these technologies has been very harmful both to nature and to the people who farm and consume harmful chemicals, for example. So when we talk about justice, we're not just talking about social justice, we're also talking about ecological justice. And so valorizing the indigenous knowledge, which forms the basis of the technology that is in harmony with Mother Nature, is also that occurs here and is also an important part of food justice. And thirdly, there's a recognition of women's rights, landless people's rights, and the rights of people who have been historically marginalized in the food system. So there are programs and efforts at the school itself, such as I already mentioned the program for landless women and Dalit women, access to land. The first is particularly in India, where I'm located, where the situation of farmers and people who depend on agriculture is worse than ever before. There is a new assertion by peasants and farmers. More than ever, I see them out on the streets, despite it being COVID right now. There was a national lockdown, people were not going out because of a risk to their health. We saw farmers mobilizing in huge numbers against a law that our government passed, which is favoring privatization and corporate control of our food system. So more than ever, we see farmers out on the streets asserting themselves, and interestingly, farmers are also building alliances across ideological lines. So in the past, we had, farmers from the left, farmers from the right, farmers from the middle, not necessarily working together. Now we see unprecedented alliances at the national levels because there's a realization that we have to come together, because the issue of farmers is hitting the national conscience. And despite politics of ideology, farmers groups are joining hands and fighting against corporate control and trying to bring the attention to the rights of peasants. Another very big change that I've seen over the past decade is the growth of agroecology as a movement and in policy circles. A decade ago, agroecology existed on the fringes. Today, we've reached a situation where the FAO, which is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, which was principally responsible for pushing forward green revolution across the world, last year organized a global symposium on agroecology where they admitted that agroecology is the future if we want to save our planet and if we want to save our people. They gave a very important signal to national governments across the world. And this is something we've seen even in India. We have an unprecedented policy interest in agroecology today. Now, this also comes with many challenges because advocates of agroecology, particularly those that are linked to social movements, are very concerned when agroecology is taken up by policy, particularly by states that are neoliberal. When these states start to support agroecology, there are genuine risks about the dilution of the principles of agroecology, about private capital entering agroecology, and so there are these dilemmas and there are risks. Have a very strong legacy of social justice struggles in this country, both pre-independence and post-independence, and also because of the way that our society is extremely hierarchical. We have a caste system which is very entrenched, and so struggles for social justice have taken on very different forms. So on the one hand, we have the Gandhian movement, which talks about Swaraj, the idea of self-determination or self-reliance, as well as the environment. Then we have the Dalits and the Bahujans, who are the oppressed castes in India, who have been talking about the rights and asserting the rights of the oppressed castes in this country. We have a women's movement. We have a homegrown socialist movement which denounced Eurocentric ideologies, including communism and fascism. So we have a very strong movement culture in this country, and that has really strongly impacted our food justice struggle. The inequality of castes has also affected the food movement, because primarily we have a difference between the landed peasantry and the landless peasantry. So the landed peasantry are the land-owning, so-called dominant castes, and no, they're not large landlords. You know, the majority of them are small peasants, small and middle peasants, but there are certain castes who own land, and then there are certain castes who are landless, which includes Dalits, but also other castes such as pastoralists. So there's a kind of class conflict, one might say, between the landed peasantry. And the farmers' movements of today are mostly composed of those peasants who own land. They mobilized as a result of market forces and prices. So landowning peasants tended to be much more market-oriented and much more the victims of the capitalist agriculture. We have a very big farmer suicide epidemic, which has really hit this class of small and middle peasants, and that the farmer suicide epidemic is occurring as a result of huge amounts of debt that farmers are taking on, usually informal debt, by mortgaging their lands, and they're unable to pay back the debt, and which has led to many farmers' suicides. And so these kinds of inequalities between farmers, and particularly based on land ownership, are important. One drawback of the food movement today is that the issues of the landless, the issues of the oppressed caste, the issues of women do not find a very central spotlight in national discussions on food justice. The challenge before us is how to privilege these issues, how to make them central in discussions around food justice, while also addressing the farmer suicides crisis, which is also one of the greatest humanitarian crises of our times.
Oh, yeah. Hi, my name is Case Wheatley, and I am an agroecology master's student here at UW-Madison. And for nearly the last year, I have been involved with the land project that we now refer to as the COVID-19 Mutual Aid Garden. Like so much, this effort has been very much an iterative process and has transformed in all sorts of different ways, conceptually, socially, biophysically, and I'm very sure it will continue to do so. So a group of agroecology students, including myself and university staff, received permission to steward the land of the former agricultural research station in the Eagle Heights Gardens here in Madison in May of this past spring. And we have been growing on the land in an agroecological manner ever since. A special acknowledgement to Tom Bryan of the Greenhouse Learning Community and Malachi Pershey, who have put in hundreds of hours on the land this past season. So we are at a land grant, land grab at university, which was funded by the theft and sale of Native people's territories in this very land that we grow upon, traditional Ho-Chunk territory. This land is located only a short walk from burial mounds. So we are very much complicit in this land grant, land grab colonial history. That being said, we believe that we can hold these histories and ongoing legacies present as we steward the land, and this can inform us in how we move forward. Originally, the name for the the land project was the COVID-19 Victory Garden, in reference to the residential gardens grown during World War I and World War II. But we decided that this name did not truly capture the ethos of the project, and it very much carried the baggage of American imperialism. So we decided instead on the name of the COVID-19 Mutual Aid Garden, following the explosion of mutual aid groups and cooperative garden initiatives, which formed in the early weeks and months of the pandemic. We saw ourselves as in alignment with these groups who were voluntarily organizing together in order to support and take care of one another's material needs, as we clearly cannot rely on those in power to do so for us. In a recent talk, Dr. Nan Enstad referred to mutual aid as a form of caretaking. We are very much working or attempting to work in this vein. So the vast majority of the food grown in the garden is distributed to Badger Rock Middle School and Neighborhood Center, which operates a weekly food pantry for residents on the south side of town. We see this as solidarity work against a colonial system of racial capitalism that has created and perpetuated health, wealth, and safety disparities to the detriment of Black and Indigenous folks, as well as other communities of color. Since the start of the pandemic, these disparities have only worsened, and the Mutual Aid Garden works in solidarity with the movements towards food justice and food sovereignty for the very communities, also for the very communities who have been historically marginalized by the university. That being said, we are moving at the speed of trust. Being on the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk Nation, we have begun conversation and relationship with Bill Quackenbush, who is their tribal historian. He has visited the land multiple times this summer and has discussed bringing Ho-Chunk youth onto the land to show them the agroecological forms of agriculture that we are utilizing. But during a pandemic, it's kind of hard to make these things work. But so this next growing season, we plan to reshape the land, creating new garden beds that will be 100 feet long and 4 feet wide, which we will offer to groups of students and community members to collectively manage food production. We will be collaborating with Wong Sheik, a Native undergrad student group, and we hope to work with other student and community groups as well. So we believe that the collective model, collective gardens, is best in terms of working towards food justice and food sovereignty. The neoliberal food regime reifies the individual and individual action, which tells us that the only action that can take place for an individual is through the marketplace. We reject this. The COVID-19 Mutual Aid Garden is instead a space to practice collective care for the land and for one another, and to do so in a manner which acknowledges our different identities rather than disregarding them. In the garden, we are and will continue utilizing agroecological growing practices. Agroecology is context dependent and a plural epistemology. We at the university can do agroecology, but it is not necessarily the same thing as that as campesinos in Cuba or indigenous peoples in Guatemala. The definition we are promoting is one from Via Campesina, which states that agroecology is a methodology that puts into conversation peasant and indigenous knowledge with agronomy and systems ecology while recognizing biological, social, and cosmological factors of complexity. For us in practice, this means utilizing minimal inputs, modeling our garden beds off of ancestral Menominee raised beds, and incorporating polycultures of annuals and perennials. It also means promoting seed saving, agrobiodiversity, and engaging in a participatory manner, promoting the process as the product, the means as the ends.
Hi, I'm Chris Keith, I'm a PhD student in geography at the University of Kentucky, and until recently a master's student in geography in the University of Wisconsin. I came into the Mutual Aid Garden project this past spring as part of a larger project around Black diasporic food and seed justice. What became the Trade Routes Afro-Culinary Diaspora Gardens project was started between Yusuf Benrella, Rugenger, and myself, originally with funding from UW Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems, as an effort to bring to light the role of seed keeping and ancestral foods in Black diasporic agricultural histories and their connections to contemporary food movements, environmental education, and community health. A little background, this project and my own work is driven by some overarching questions about an important part of agroecological practice, that of in situ agrobiodiversity conservation. In other words, the things that people do or don't do with seeds, and things that seeds may or may not do on their own. Going to use terms like seed saving and seed keeping interchangeably, although they come out of their own unique environmental and political traditions. Seed keeping in particular is coming into increasing popularity thanks to indigenous thinkers, writers, farmers, and activists leading seed keeping projects and food sovereignty movements. I situate this among larger discussions around the conservation of in situ agrobiodiversity. Virginia Nazarea in particular outlines a division between conservation by design, which consists of deliberate seed projects and collections and conservation in effect, which occurs as a result of people growing food and saving seed in backyard gardens, vacant lots, and small farms. Levon Bell, speaking of this type of seed work, notes, it was okay to have haphazardness, meaning gardens that evolve based on what we eat and spit out. The impetus behind this project was to facilitate and boost ongoing work around ag experimentation, environmental education, and food justice in Madison, especially as it relates to local Black communities. By introducing further growing out and saving the seeds of Black diaspora crop varieties, we sought to start an experimental process of adaptation to these crops, to the climatic and environmental conditions of southern Wisconsin. This would situate them with a longer history of adaptation to the landscapes of the Americas for Black folks as well as Black seeds. This would also provide opportunities for food and environmental education for critical cultural components, deepening curricula around food systems and food sovereignty for undergraduate students on campus, as well as both youth and adults in the community at large. Our main sites in Madison are this 22 by 33 foot plot that we were invited to steward by the F.H. King Students for Safe Agriculture undergraduate group. These 3 50 by 15 foot beds at the West Madison Agricultural Research Station. And the focus here is 5 25 by 10 foot beds we were invited to steward in the mutual aid garden. So these were polycultural trials of mainly West African, Caribbean, and African American varieties with some extras thrown in for fun, inspired by the Three Sisters model of planting from many indigenous agricultural practices. So these beds featured coral sorghum, hill country red okra, callaloo or amaranth, sugar dip sweet sorghum, and white velvet okra as the vertical elements. For ground cover, we had sweet potatoes, which were Beauregards and garnets on the eastern edges of each bed, and melons, so Georgia rattlesnakes, early moonbeams, and agouti on the western edges of each bed. Interplanted into the tall crops were black-eyed peas, with some like Connecticut field pumpkins thrown in there in the middle of each bed, because we just had them. And then on the north and south ends, we saw splashes of like a dark red. These are castors.
So with the coming of fall here in Madison, few crops other than the collards, some other brassicas are still growing. There's some leeks as well. So we've begun construction on a caterpillar tunnel to extend the season and extend the harvest. We'll put the caterpillar tunnel over top of the collards and these beds. These collards are part of an heirloom trial put on by Seed Savers Exchange, a nonprofit. And we are excited to save the seed of these collards, these heirloom varieties, and promote agrobiodiversity, hopefully growing them out this next season as well in 2021. So Chris has been involved very much in these efforts of agrobiodiversity and seed saving, and we've learned a lot from him over these past few months.
Thanks. So in the face of the ongoing pandemic and its economic and social precarity, we continue to harvest and provide produce to folks who need it. With the onset of fall, especially, we're collecting and keeping seed to adapt these crops to Madison for seasons to come. So all the way on the right here in the slide, you can see some dry seed pods from bene or sesame, which will be saved and grown out year after year. So hopefully they'll become more robust, more viable in Wisconsin. Other than that, we're building community connections that we've developed this past season to build a project that's accessible and sustainable in the long term. Here is our contact info. If you have any questions or want to hit us up for any reason, and thanks so much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Jackie. And now we move to a live discussion of these 3 presentations, and we have 3 distinguished discussants, and I will introduce them in the order in which they will speak. Our discussants today are Monica White, who is an assistant professor of environmental justice at the University of Wisconsin-Madison with joint appointment in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies and in the Department of Community and Environmental Sociology. Her research engages communities of color and grassroots organizations that are involved in the development of sustainable community food systems, so the strategy to respond to issues of hunger and food inaccessibility. Her first book, Freedom Farmers, Agricultural Resistance and the Black Freedom Movement, 1880-2010, contextualizes new forms of contemporary urban agriculture within the historical legacies of African-American farmers who fought to acquire and stay on the land. Our second discussant is Nan Enstad, who is the Buttle-Sewell Professor of Community and Environmental Sociology and the Director of the Food Studies Network at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research and teaching examine the history of global capitalism and how people have lived and struggled within and against it. She has long-standing commitments to cultural and to racist, ethnic, labor, queer, and gender studies. And last but not least, Sophie Sapp Moore, who is currently a Mellon postdoc fellow in the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as I mentioned, a co-organizer of the Sawyer Seminar. Sophie is an interdisciplinary political ecologist whose research uses ethnographic and historical methods to understand intersecting processes of social, ecological, and political change in the Afro-Americas. Her current book project, Freedom's Crown, examining the political ecology of agrarian reform in Haiti's central borderlands since 1804. So Monica.
Hi, thank you. Thank you to the organizers. My apology for not being able to stay through the question and answer, but I am really grateful for the opportunity to talk about the ways that food justice can be informed by our engagements as academics with community organizations. My relationship with Baba Malik Yakini began as we were planning the celebration of the Detroit Rebellion, 67. And from that relationship, we were able to, he's a brother. He's like a brother to me. I love him dearly. He has taught me everything I know, and I'm here absolutely because of him. One of the things I think that is important is to talk about the ways that community organizations have enhanced and affected my work. One, it's important to recognize that the Academy was limited in terms of how they told me to understand the work of Black farmers. In other words, they really focused on a deficit model, which is looking at Black agriculture through the lens of sharecropping, tenant farming, and slavery. And so instead of that, what I saw happening in Detroit and the work of the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network was that people were embracing agriculture and turning to agriculture as a strategy of resistance, resilience, and freedom. And in this regard, I think what happened was members and attending the events created the kinds of research questions that then led to Freedom Farmers, the book. So one, I think that my relationship with community is that we co-created the kinds of research questions that would come out that I would study. There's a richness of the data that comes from understanding not just what the Academy says the answers are, but what community folks talk about and the ways that they strategize around addressing these particular issues. And I think it's also important to recognize that there's a richness of the data when you're actually actively involved with community organizations and you're actually running composting workshops or my favorite, worms. The last thing I want to say is, what will we say about food justice in this particular moment? I think it's important for us to recognize that although when you look at the news, you feel often like we don't have any power, it's important for us to recognize the sources of our power. In other words, one of the first things I think is that we often hear about voting with our dollars, but I don't think it's just about voting with our dollars. I think part of it is voting with our dollars, but also supporting the kinds of food systems that we want and not asking the kinds of discount questions that people often do when we go to farmers markets and wait until the last minute to not pay people for their labor and their time. I think another thing that we have to do is we have to really listen to those that are food insecure. As academics, we often think we're the ones with the answers, but people who live in food insecure communities have a lot of solutions that we wouldn't even think to answer had it not been for us asking them. And the last thing I think think is important is for us to think about the ways that we can coalition build. In other words, are there ways that the food system, on campus, the catering can also support the growing of local farmers, Hmong farmers, Black farmers, Indigenous farmers? What are the ways that as an individual, how can I make some suggestions and recommendations when I'm planning a conference? How can I make sure that we source from those folks who are doing this work in ways that we really want to elevate? And so it's with these things in mind that I think that we can all be a part of food justice and bringing about the kind of food system we really like to see. I apologize for leaving early. Please contact me if you have questions. Thank you all so much. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our second discussion is Nan, please.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I'm going to write down the time so I don't go over my 5 minutes, but it's really an honor to be part of this Plantationocene event. There's tons of people with more knowledge than I have in this, in the participants. So I'm going to make some big flag some big concepts for us and kind of looking forward to the discussion. The first is that knowledge is relational, and Pablo and several of the discussants brought up knowledge production. And I think that sometimes we think, well, there's knowledge in the academy and then there's the collaborative knowledge, but I would say that knowledge is always relational. It always comes out of relationships, but we fool ourselves into thinking that we have ideas or that knowledge is an individual commodity that we nurture and build within the academic context. And we fetishize and monetize that, and then we protect it and we build it in a CV, and we create these weird like documents called CVs that we use to trade in knowledge. And if we think of knowledge as individual like that, we're more likely to be exploitative, right? And if we think about how knowledge is always relational, then knowledge, the way that academic knowledge relies on denying where those relationships are, where those collaborations are. So just as food is, how food is produced is really important, not just what the food is, and that's one of our lessons of food justice. So is how is knowledge produced important to this? And so how do we really interrogate, not just how do we go out and what are best practices for building collaborations, but how do we really interrogate our own culture, which is imbued with the capitalist values of the agro-business food system. So I want to bring that out. The second thing I want to bring out is labor, and white supremacy. We need to be talking about labor. I had a class that was before the pandemic where in the history department that was about food, and I had students map the food system on the first day. They mapped everything from farm to fork, but farm was very abstracted for them, and they got done with a half hour of a brilliant, beautiful conversation, and what was missing was labor. So, and at the end of the semester, I actually had students write on the class evaluation, talk too much about labor. So now we are confronted with the fact that our food system is breaking down, right, with COVID-19, and we have an opportunity to think about the workers at the foundation of this food system and how much that's connected to white supremacy. And Black Lives Matters, the Black Lives Matters movement, the African Americans who are more at risk, the immigrant workers who are more at risk, and really think about and interrogate. This is a moment, right? We all know this is a moment. How do we activate that moment? And the last thing that I'll put on the table is imagination. The great poet Diane de Prima died this week. I have a quote from her on a note card that I always keep by my computer, and I'm going to read it to you. "The only war is the war against the imagination. All other wars are subsumed in it." And I think at this moment, what I found so wonderful about all of these 4 presentations is that they broaden our imagination of what's possible. All 4 of these people, groups, and people who are representing these groups are not just standing back and critiquing this overwhelming, massive capitalist agricultural system and food system. They're creating a new world. They have freed their imagination to say there is something that we can do. And so I want to think about how important it is for us to take on capitalism, to take on the big structure of the agro-food system, and draw on these activists. I think that sometimes in the classrooms and academic contexts, we're so good at showing how the system functions and how oppressive it is, that we become sort of functionalist and we think that there's nothing that we can do about it. So we have more to gain, I think, from these collaborations in freeing our imaginations from the ways that capitalism constrains it, makes us think that this is the only way forward. We need more technology, let's get more GMOs. And really start thinking. So I take a lot of inspiration from these about imagination. Okay, that's my bit.
Thank you so much, Nan. And thank you for sharing poetry also with us. I want to remind all the attendees that you can start using the Q&A function to ask questions, and you can do it at any time. We have our final comment from Sophie, and then we'll go to the Q&A. Sophie, please.
Okay, so thanks to my colleagues, my co-organizers, but especially to the 49 of you in the audience who, I know we have people with such varied experience and backgrounds, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I guess as the last speaker in the last event of this long series, I wanted to focus what I have to say on making some connections between what we heard today, what we're thinking about today, and some of the themes that we've been talking about over the past year. So I have 3 points that I want to touch on, which I'll just be able to do very briefly, but I'm happy to expand on later. One is the global reach of this discussion. The second is the intersectionality of food justice as a project and as a politics. And then the third is food justice as an abolitionist project. So the first thing that I wanted to address is I'm interested in hearing from you all in the audience who have such varied experience, what we get from thinking about these 3 places together. So Karnataka, India, Detroit, Michigan, Madison, Wisconsin. What is the value in putting these places into conversation? Because not only do we have our speakers from these places, but we're also thinking about the places themselves, how they're different and how justice looks different in different locations. All of our speakers highlighted land in particular. So we heard about mobilization of the landless in Karnataka. We heard about D-town farmers' long-term desire to own the land on which they farm. We heard about a little bit about the role of the land grab university in cultivating stolen land on this Ho-Chunk territory. So in bringing up land, I'm wanting to emphasize that these global struggles are connected in a really concrete way, very material practices that are involved in ecological transformation. And so that brings me to something that I think it was Ruthie Gilmore brought up when she was here last year, when she noted that the question, how do people organize themselves in relation to land, is a political question. And so the projects that we're thinking about today have shown me that working for food justice is a militant practice in that lineage. So again, the question, how do people organize themselves in relation to land, is one of the core ways that we can connect food justice as a practice to food justice as a politics. So next I want to touch on intersectionality and food justice. All of our guests have touched on the impossibility of thinking about food justice without thinking about ongoing overlapping struggles for racial justice, for economic justice, for gender justice, for ecological justice. And what this really brought home for me is that food justice isn't abstract at all. And I think Nan was also signaling this in some of her comments, is that when Malik Yakini uses the term relative justice, I think that brings us towards a frame for thinking about justice in practice is not an ideal, a thing out there, an abstract concept, but something that is in movement, that transforms what it touches along the way. So not just the land and what we grow and how we grow it, but the people who are doing the growing and the people who encounter that project. So again, I want to turn back to something from very early in the seminar. Michelle Murphy, one of our first guests, who said, she asked a question of what is justice when we cannot turn to the state for justice? And I think that's a really important question. And the way that she continued with that was to think about framing justice as a practice of being an ethical relation. I think each of our guests today has explored what that would look like, how to be an ethical relation with the land where you are. And this is something that, you know, farmers and people who work with the land are trying to do. It's a practice. It's not an abstract ideal, but something that is work in practice. I don't want to go on too long, but I guess I just want to raise a final point about maybe a little speculation about what is useful or maybe not useful. I'm eager to hear your thoughts in thinking about food justice as an abolitionist project. So again, to return to Ruthie Gilmore's talk here last fall, she emphasized that people make abolition geographies from what they have. And what she's getting at there is that abolitionists start from where they are. And so in our talking about land and about how people relate to land, about being in ethical relation to the ecologies where we are, today's presentations highlighted for me what a transformation toward justice looks like, how that collective project articulates with different ecologies, with different positions. So those could be political, geographic, economic, or social positions. And Ashlesha and Malik both emphasize the value of political education, the recognition of overlapping struggles for various forms of justice. Of course, Nan and Monica and I are all at the university. The COVID Mutual Aid Garden is at university land. We talked a little bit about, we heard a little bit about the pedagogical function of the Mutual Aid Garden. And so I'm interested in thinking about that kind of work as political education and how, so when Malik, for example, pointed out the current rising pushback against white supremacy as increasingly in dialogue with the food justice movement, what does that offer towards building collective political imagination? So I think this fits very well with Nan's final point as well, is that abolition asks us to consider how we might make the kinds of violence that concern us unthinkable. And so in doing that project, what we've considered today are some propositions for how we might begin to do that kind of work. And each of our guests has reminded us how those very material, concrete practices of ecological transformation, in turn, they shape our political imaginations, our collective political imaginations, making different kinds of futures, more just futures imaginable. Okay, that's what I got.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Now I'm going to turn it over to Monique, who's going to be moderating the Q&A.
So first of all, thank you so much to all of the participants for your wonderful talks, to Malik, to Ashlesha, to Chris and to Case, to Monica, who I think had to step out, to Nan and to Sophie. I thought, so everybody can put in their questions. And I thought as questions come in, I would start off though by asking if some of the panelists could take up Sophie's last question to really everybody here. What are the sorts of pragmatic ways that those of us who are at university can be listening to communities, can be in relationships where resources aren't only at the university, but may moved out of it. So if any of the panelists would want to give ideas about how we might do that, that would be terrific. And I'm going to then move to the next question. And you guys, the panelists, can just unmic themselves and speak. So when you're ready to speak.
Chris and Case are here, or at least Case is here as well too. So Case, if you feel like answering, you should go ahead as well. I just wanted to note land and land stewardship is one point of relation, right? So if people have thoughts about how through the structure of the university can cultivate ethical relations specifically around stewardship, and even just to understand whose land this is that we are on, which of those people are present or might be interested in trying to build relationship, and of what benefit that relationship would be to those communities. So I think being very clear about what benefit the collaboration would offer to the communities involved is a really fundamentally important first step that should always be the first step, but often isn't discussed until much later in the process, if at all.
I'm not sure I totally know what you mean by tangible, but I think that for me, I really notice that who I'm talking to, where I am, shapes what feels real and meaningful to me. And so I was struck by Monica's comment about how she met Malik Yakini when they were going to do something about the Detroit uprising, a commemoration of the Detroit uprising, and she got to know him and she got to hang out with him, and that changed her questions. And Monica, you know, as a historian, I've read all of these treatments of the history of agriculture that that were in that deficit model that she's talking about. And it just never occurred to anybody because they kept talking within that conversation with each other, you know, and that's what was setting the conversation. And Monica came up with a totally different question because she was actually interacting with community members who were doing something else. And so, I mean, I don't know that for myself and the kind of work I do that I can start with the tangible thing. I think that knowledge is a process. And if all we do is stay within our little departments and our little academic fields, we're going to come up with the same questions that other people are asking, and they're going to be irrelevant to communities. And so I need to just like put myself out there and be in relation, be an ethical relation. I really like that idea of justice as ethical relations, and just, you know, pay attention. As Malik said, a lot of times people come with their questions and impose them, and then they're the ones that are going to gain. But yeah, so for sure we can, like, I think with the people who are the participants here, we could list a set of best practices of ways people have done this. You know, there are tons and tons of people on this participant list who have already created tangible results. But if you are a graduate student and you're looking for how to do that, I think you got to get to know the people that you want to be in relation with and shift your intellectual community. And we often don't recognize how much we're constantly being, our brain is not an individual thing, right? So.
Can I add a little bit to that? Is I really liked Monica's suggestion about catering. And I was thinking, for example, about UC Davis, another land grant institution where I did my PhD, where the catering was provided by Bon Appetit Catering, which also caters to prisons in Northern California. And so a broad collective push to divest from services that also service the prison industrial complex is one really concrete action that gained a lot of popular support at UC Davis. And the catering, I believe, eventually adopted serving more food grown on the ag school campus to students, so food grown by students for students, and to reduce the relationship between the institution and giving money to an organization that also materially supports the prison industrial complex. So that's really what I mean in a very concrete way about thinking about food justice as an abolitionist project, is like, it's even kind of a boring action. It's not very exciting. It involves like a lot of bureaucratic maneuvering. It might seem to some students or people who are not very politically active that this is not such an important thing to change the catering service in the student union. But I think it is, those kind of actions are really important. And even for just people to know that the service that provides your meal at lunch on campus also provides food, industrially grown food, to prison populations is something really important for students and faculty and staff to be aware of.
Malik, Case, Chris, anything you'd want to add?
I'll just add briefly, I think something really powerful about the mutual aid garden being in Eagle Heights is just the environment we're in. So much of our education at the university takes, walled buildings with, not very much engagement with the outside world. Having your hands in actual soil, having those other relations. We speak about like multi-species and, learning from the other. But to do that, we can also go out and actually be in tangible relationship with these things. I think Elizabeth Hoover, who was on here earlier, she has a quote of saying something to the effect of, we can't work towards food sovereignty if we can't feed ourselves. And I think having a space on campus where people can actually learn how to do these things, how to do food justice, how to grow food is a really powerful thing. So thinking about pedagogy and curriculum outside of the normative context of the classroom, I think is a really powerful thing as well.
Great, thanks.
Can I jump in real quick?
Please.
Sweet, sorry. Hey everyone, just to tag on to that, so we're, this past summer at some point, Case and I were in the mutual aid garden and kind of talking about the kind of the future of the project. Black Indigenous ag and food imaginations, and we had this question of like how would we kind of continue this project without reproducing the university, right? What would it look like? And I think kind of the interesting thing about that piece of land is that it's decidedly not super accessible for the folks who the mutual aid garden is like meant to serve, right? It's like it's on university land. So it's a little out of the way. And it's a very kind of like acute, like geographic tension, right? And so there's that. There's also, I just did return to Badger Rock, which we mentioned in the video. Like they are doing like an impressive amount of like food growing on their own land, especially providing land to folks in the community to grow food at Badger Rock. Just to give a quick shout out. And also like, if you're, say, a university person with like extra time, labor, funds, you can like give that labor to Badger Rock in the food growing project, regardless of whether or not it provides a research question for you to like take up. Which just to throw that out there.
Thanks so much. So I'm gonna read a question from Andrea Knutson. She asks, or she says, I'm listening from the Great Lakes region, about a half-hour north of Detroit. In terms of a land-based understanding of food justice, how can remapping and reimagining food justice in terms of Indigenous trade routes contribute to this conversation? So, and I'll repeat the question. I know I speak quickly. So in terms of a land-based understanding of food justice, how can remapping and reimagining food justice in terms of Indigenous trade routes contribute to this conversation?
Well, I think that I would love to hear what Andrea has to say about, or Andrea has to say about this, because it sounds like you have a great idea here, and I would like to hear it. You know, I am super inspired by the Indigenous work that's being done to, you know, establish food sovereignty and bring back Indigenous varieties and re-establish those relationships. I think people are learning a ton from that, and it is something that hasn't come into this discussion yet. So I just want to kind of acknowledge that is another, you know, source of I guess it was mentioned in terms of climate change, right? That's a really important, Christian mentioned it in terms of climate change is a super important form of reconnecting and resisting sort of a capitalist agribusiness and saving the planet. So it's super important. How that relates to the original trade routes and reconstructing them as a historian, I'm super interested in what the potential would be and what we could learn from that. So I'm all ears, but I guess I just want to kind of affirm the question there and where it comes from and what we have to learn from that.
Yeah, I can say, I mean, I don't have much of an answer to the question, but I really appreciate it. And I think it makes me think, as Nan is noting, about the current real surge, especially in the Midwest, of attention to, interest in, and yes, even funding for Indigenous food security and sort of the promotion of Indigenous food as something that all people all around the Midwest can learn about. So like the Indigenous Kitchen was just crowdfunded in Minneapolis and will be opening really soon if it's not already open, featuring all Native chefs cooking all Native foods. And I think that that's a really important move that's become a lot bigger in the past few years. And so not only reconnecting Native people with their ancestral foods, which they have not been able to access due to limited food security and limited opportunities for food sovereignty on their own ancestral lands. I'm really interested in the question of how that might grow into, as I think Andrea is suggesting, changing the food system at the level of like moving food around the country. And so, you know, could we expect to be trying the ancestral foods of people living on Ho-Chunk land in California? Like, what about transporting food around the country? How might a turn to respecting and supporting Indigenous foodways change how we think about the food system overall, is I think what is being asked. And I think that's a really important question that bears more discussion.
We have another question from Colleen Hennigan, who is going to have to go and teach her discussion section, but I'll ask the question. It's a terrific question. And she says, thank you. They say, thank you so much for speaking and sharing your experiences. I have a question for everyone, but is tied to what Nan and Monica said. How do we balance hearing from community members around agricultural issues and letting their ideas guide projects with the more intellectually extractive infrastructure within academia? So how do we balance hearing from community members around agricultural issues and letting their ideas guide projects? How do we balance this with the more intellectually extractive infrastructure within academia?
Well, I'll jump in with that, and I invite particularly the graduate students on the panel to jump in because you're trying to do this. And but what I will say is my relationship to this comes from having my ideas changed through doing oral interviews, having my viewpoints transformed, not just about my project, but really about life in general, and with working class folks for my last book. And so part of what that brought up for me is that we have to challenge that extractive component. I really appreciate the question. In all of we have to transform the culture, right? So it's kind of like, if you're a farmer and you want to, convert from, chemical agriculture to organic, well, it matters that you're surrounded by people who are growing GMO crops and dumping pesticides, right? And it matters that the soil that you're growing on is now you're going to have pests because the soil is not healthy, right? Because it's been treated this way for so long. So that's a conversion process. And I think that we really need to talk about this as a conversion process, not just what are the 3 best practices so that you can go out and do the thing that you want and have it create something that still gets you the career and gets you the, we really have to take this on as a project, just like you have to reclaim and renew land. And yeah, we need to be talking about this a lot more. We need scholarship on this question that takes it on with the seriousness that Colleen's question takes it on.
I'll add in our process at the Mutual Aid Garden, in trying to work with community members and create community partnerships. A lot of that started by just reaching out without any sort of agenda other than be like, we have this land. It seems like maybe we could have a relationship and I can show you what we're doing. And some of those conversations have, continued, and people have come out to the land, we've gone out to their spaces. And before really engaging with any sort of research, some things have been proposed of like, hey, could we write a grant together and we can give you this money? We can fund what you need done. So, I am a grad student, so I'm not in the place of needing to pump out papers for a 10-year process or whatever it may be. So maybe I'm in a different place than others, but yeah, we're moving at the speed of trust. And sometimes that's pretty slow, especially during a pandemic when you can't always meet in person.
Chris or Sophie, anything you'd want to add in response to Colleen's question? Okay, I am going to move to a question from Alicia about Cianas Cruz. And Alicia asks, are you aware of movements addressing the challenges we've been discussing while building solidarity with other groups beyond the US or with communities that are not necessarily rooted in the US?
Yeah, I think I was appreciating this question because my invitation to Ashlesha came from my association with another Via Campesina movement in Haiti. And so I was interested in thinking about how global organizations like the Via Campesina connect farmers around the world. And, I think as Ashlesha talked about, the farmers who she works with, who she organizes, go by many different names. Some call themselves peasants, landless, small farmers. Some are landholders, some are not. We don't use the word peasant in the United States, but that doesn't mean that there's not an opportunity for solidarity between farmers based in the US, or as Alicia says, rooted in the US, and global peasant solidarity movements like Via Campesina. I think we're kind of seeing that. I think Ashlesha mentioned in her presentation the FAO's adoption of food sovereignty as a global principle and a goal for environmental agrarian transformation around the world. So thinking about food production on global scale is something that's happening at like the highest institutional level, and that's directly influenced by global movements like La Via Campesina. I think that there can be some challenges that can come out of differences, say, in terminology, or how farmers understand their position in the food system. So like organizing around peasant as a category, around campesino as a category, is something that's very powerful in Latin America and the Caribbean, but might not feel as meaningful to farmers in Detroit. And so I think that creating opportunities for those farmers to talk to each other is really important. And I think Ashlesha touched on this a little bit, but farmer to farmer exchanges are one example. It's really powerful. And actually land-grant universities have played a really big role in this. It's bringing grad students, agronomists, agricultural scientists, soil scientists, entomologists, agricultural engineers, and agricultural economists to do exchanges or to conduct trainings with movements. So these are explicitly political movements that are based in Latin America or elsewhere around the world. And I think that also kind of addresses the previous question as to about like redistribution of resources and how it is that we can use our position within the institution in a way that is actually concretely useful for the communities that we wish to be in relation with. And again, I didn't have the opportunity to say this in response to the previous question, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it can be balanced. I don't think about it as a power differential that can be balanced, but I do think that reparation is an appropriate framework for thinking about what we in powerful institutions can do with the resources at our disposal. So like as Case was suggesting, to quite literally transfer those. And one of those resources is knowledge and access to technology. So, volunteering to conduct a training that is not related to your research, that doesn't meet your research needs, but rather meets the needs of the movement that you're working with would be one example. And those are definitely happening and have been happening, even since the 20s and 30s.
Any thoughts, Chris, Case, Nan?
I think in terms of solidarity with other groups beyond the U.S., I think one of the struggles, and maybe Sophie mentioned this a little bit, but in terms of terminology, I think food justice is often a term that's much more used here in the U.S., whereas food sovereignty, it spans outwardly more. And so I think there are a number of groups who are doing this work, and Ashlesha with Via Campesina is one of these groups. Agroecology and food sovereignty are global movements that are pushing these things, from the farm scale to the food system to the nation level. And there are solidarity networks. There's a U.S.-Cuba food sovereignty solidarity network, bringing farmers and students and activists from around the country. And these things exist all over. So I think there are a lot of them. I think there should be more of them. I think especially for people in power in the university, it would be great if we all could go learn from people doing the work on the ground and have a more grounded, politicized perspective. Yeah.
Can I just add one quick comment to that? I think I want to make particular note of where Ashlesha studied at the Colegio del Sur, right? Is that there are institutions that are not elite US-based institutions where people are doing a lot of amazing work about ecology, about agroecology, about farming in theory and in practice. And a lot of those institutions are explicitly political, which is why they don't necessarily appear on the same page, I guess, as when we think about land grant institutions in the US. But building relationships with those institutions, I think, is really important for connecting farmers and people thinking about farming globally, because that is where those scholars and practitioners often go to study and to learn and to teach.
So I think we only have a couple more minutes, and we do have another question. Maybe the panelists can answer that offline just to make sure we end on time. But I want to make sure to give a chance to Nan or to Chris to say any final thoughts in response to Alicia's question. No pressure. There really isn't. I just didn't want to move too quickly where you wouldn't have a chance to respond. All right. Well, thank you all so much who came in the midst of pandemic times to be part of this last event and to be part of the work of thinking forward what we're going to be doing, how it is that we can continue to build synergies between communities in the university, communities outside of the university, and change our research agendas, be part of lobbying and activism. For example, one thing is to have the kinds of service that many people do, something that counts in the university's eyes, which it doesn't count in the same way. So there's many things that I think can and should be done. And I really appreciate the things that you all here today said. And it's just been an honor and a pleasure to be part of this conversation with all of you over the past year and a half. So this concludes our discussion of the Plantationocene, about the utility of that analytic, what it allows us to see and what it obscures, and our passage from that term to the question of food justice and sovereignty, and thinking about what would this be, and this might be a way of addressing and redressing the ongoing injustices of plantation agriculture that continue to shape our moment. So yeah, so that is it. But thank you all, and
thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
so much.
everybody.
And thank you to all the attendees too. Thank you.